Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 515, I call up H.R. 4015 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4015, a bill to amend Title 18 of the Social Security Act to repeal the Medicare Sustainable Growth Rate and improve Medicare payments for physicians and other professionals and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 515, the amendment printed in Part B of House Report 113-379 is adopted, and the bill, as amended, is considered read. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, will each control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on H.R. 4015.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the Sustainable Growth Rate, or SGR, is the formula through which Medicare reimburses physicians. Since 2003, Congress has voted 17 times for temporary patches, or doc fixes, to avert ever larger cuts to providers. The uncertainty of the SGR threatens doctors' ability to continue practicing medicine and accepting Medicare patients, and endangers seniors' access to care. Absent congressional action, providers face a 24% cut on April 1st, 2014. To stave off this cut, we can either pass another patch and kick the can down the road again, or we can repeal this flawed formula for good. Today's bill, H.R. 4015, permanently repeals the SGR and replaces it with payment reform policy that has been agreed upon by the bipartisan leaders of the Energy and Commerce, the Ways and Means Committees, and the Senate Finance Committee. As chairman of the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, I have been working for the past 3 years on legislation to permanently repeal the SGR. And I am very pleased that on February 6, 2014, we reached a bipartisan, bicameral agreement embodied in today's legislation. Unfortunately, since then, Senate Majority Leader Reid has refused to negotiate with us on how to pay for this package. So, we have brought forward H.R. 4015, which is fully paid for by delaying implementation of the individual mandate, a policy supported by both Republicans and Democrats. The bill enjoys more than 100 co-sponsors and the support of over 700 national and state provider and stakeholder groups. So I urge all my colleagues to vote for H.R. 4015 to ensure that our seniors have access to the doctors they know and trust. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, to start the debate on our side, I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my friend from California for yielding to me. And Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition, not to the policy before us, but to the poison pill paid for attached to this much-needed SGR repeal and replace legislation. I support the bipartisan, bicameral agreement contained in H.R. 4015 for numerous reasons. There is almost universal agreement that the sustainable growth rate is a flawed formula, and therefore Congress has been left to temporarily patch physician reimbursement for far too long. This bill permanently repeals the SGR and provides physicians with a small increase in pay for the first 5 years. I want to see our physician workforce fairly compensated for providing high-quality care to our constituents. The SGR fails to adequately do this. This legislation incentivizes physicians to focus on providing quality care instead of a high quantity of care. Finally, while this has always been extremely expensive to permanently repeal and replace the SGR, it is now estimated to cost less than $140 billion. This is less than half the cost of what it would have been a few years ago. While the costs remain significant, I believe that it is imperative we permanently fix physician payments now. That is why I am so furious Republicans are wasting valuable time by pairing this much-needed legislation with yet another ridiculous Affordable Care Act repeal vote. After more than 50 repeal votes, I think it's clear to everyone where both Democrats and Republicans stand on the Affordable Care Act. We don't need another repeal vote. The current SGR patch expires in 17 days. We should be focused on finding bipartisan pay-fors to permanently fix the SGR instead of having Republicans push through yet another bill that will surely die in the Senate. I yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I want to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, one of the co-chairs of the Doctors Caucus, who has contributed a great deal to accomplish this bipartisan agreement.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, today we vote to repeal the sustainable growth rate, a formula that was flawed from its 1997 beginning, and it's run its ugly course. As co-chairman of the House GOP Doctors Caucus, I would like to thank the Energy and Commerce Committee, especially Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Waxman, Health Subcommittee Chairman Pitts, and Ranking Member Pallone, and especially a member of the Doctors Caucus, Vice Chair Dr. Michael Burgess. And of course, the Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committees and their staffs for the tireless work to produce a policy which will help to ensure that seniors continue to have access to quality providers. Included in this legislation is my bill, and it's called the Standard of Care Protection Act, and it provides much needed clarity to the practice of medicine by confirming that federal quality incentives are no substitute in a medical malpractice case for the standards of care developed by specialty societies and determined and practiced by physicians. This is an extremely important determination that will provide fairness to both patient plaintiffs and doctors. With this vote today, we take an important step toward replacing the flawed formula, while at the same time protecting Americans by delaying the individual mandate of Obamacare by 5 years. While the current administration continues to add delays when it's politically expedient, this policy gives certainty for individuals that they won't be taxed or fined, Mr. Chairman, for not complying with a law that they can't afford. This may not be the final version of the bill, but it's time for the Senate to pass their own version and appoint conferees. SGR repeal is too important for both seniors and our doctors, and we have come too far for this policy to not reach the President's desk this year. Mr. Chairman, would you yield me 15 additional seconds?
I yield 15 seconds, gentlemen.
Gentleman may proceed for 15 seconds.
Let me just say again, we've come too far for this policy to not reach the President's desk, and I mean this year. The Senate Majority Leader needs to come to the table. Let's find a suitable path forward. Let's repeal this unsustainable physician payment policy, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased at this time to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from the state of Colorado, Ms. Duquette.
The gentlelady from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every year, sometimes more than once a year since 2003, Congress has had to step in to prevent a cut in physicians' payments. With input from a wide variety of stakeholders, we've tried to work together for many, many years on a solution to the flawed system to the sustainable growth rate formula. Until this year, we were out of luck, and the price tag for fixing the formula was ever increasing. The underlying legislation that we consider today was 11 years in the making. I'm very proud to co-sponsor this bill because it's a compromise solution for the formula we agreed on. But sadly, the majority has prescribed a bitter pill to swallow. for passage of this important bill for patients and doctors. Instead of coming to the negotiating table to discuss mutually acceptable ways to pay for this bill, the majority has decided to pay for it by delaying important provisions of the Affordable Care Act. Everybody knows that this provision is a non-starter, and it's a non-starter in the other body and in my caucus right here in the House. Because of this short-sighted tactic, the Republicans have almost guaranteed that we're going to need yet another short-term SGR patch before the current one expires on March 31st. This is bad for the doctors of America. This is bad for the patients of America. Let's get real. Let's fix this problem for good. And you know, Mr. Gingrey just recognized that this bill is not going anywhere. So let's sit down. Let's do what we did with the SGR itself, and let's figure out how to pay for it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields.
Speaker,
The gentleman
may I
from
inquire
Pennsylvania.
about how much time is on each side left?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 10 1/4 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from California has 11 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, a valuable member of the Health Subcommittee.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in supporting repealing the SGR formula. The SGR cuts will reduce doctors' compensation for treating Medicare patients by 24%. H.R. 4015 repeals and replaces SGR with a merit-based incentive payment system, MIPS, that pays doctors based on quality, not volume. Paying doctors based on quality incentivizes physicians to be as efficient and effective as possible in keeping their patients healthy. MIPS is fully paid for by a delay of Obamacare's individual mandate, a tax on Americans to force them to purchase more expensive health care that doesn't meet their needs. This bill will provide doctors who treat Medicare patients with certainty, incentivize and reward doctors to keep seniors healthy with better care, and provide individuals relief under Obamacare. Support our seniors, our doctors, and fairness for individuals under Obamacare. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4015. I yield back. Thank
The
you.
gentleman from California is
Mr.
recognized.
Speaker, at this time, I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank my colleague for yielding, Mr. Speaker. I have long been a supporter of a permanent fix to the sustainable growth rate, or SGR. The flawed SGR harms providers and consumers alike and keeps us from true innovation in the healthcare sector. But for too long, the conversation has ended with everyone recognizing the problem, but no one willing to find a middle ground to fix it. Instead, we lumber from patch to patch, kicking the can down the road with piecemeal delays or fixes here in Congress, such as we're doing today. And these disagreements only let the issue linger, causing more instability in our communities while the cost of a fix continues to rise. And that's why I've been so proud to be part of crafting the bipartisan, bicameral SGR fix policy. This policy provides a positive payment update to our providers, pushes us toward a system rewarding quality and fixing the gypsy, ensuring the Central Coast providers and others will finally gain accurate Medicare reimbursement. But today, this process, bipartisan process, is being derailed once again. By tying a delay of the individual mandate to this policy, the House majority has poisoned such a bipartisan process. Access to health care for more than 50 million seniors and persons with disabilities is a serious matter. And these partisan games could very well end our nation's best shot at amending a bad policy. So I urge the majority to pull this bill, go back to the negotiating table with all of us, and help us fix Medicare provider payments once and for all. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nevada, Dr. Heck, another member of the Doctors Caucus.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 4015. I've always stated that the #1 threat to Medicare and seniors' access to health care is the flawed SGR formula. At no time prior have we been so close in a bipartisan, bicameral way to ensuring our seniors have access to the health care providers of their choosing. And now, when we are so close, is not the time to derail the progress made by using controversial pay-fors. I will vote in favor of H.R. 4015 today because of the policy changes it represents. I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle to vote aye so we can send this bill to the Senate. And I call on the Senate to pass legislation that includes the agreed-to policy provisions with a pay-for of their choosing. Then let's go to conference and fix the SGR once and for all. Providing stability and predictability to our health care providers will result in stability and predictability for our seniors. And passing SGR reform is the fiscally responsible thing to do. The longer we delay, the more it will cost. Let's give seniors the peace of mind they deserve, that they will be able to see the Medicare provider of their choice. Let's pass H.R. 4015. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, who is the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Waxman. Mr. Speaker, today the Republican leadership once again chooses politics over substance and what's good for the American people. The current SGR patch will expire on March 31st, at which point Medicare's payment to physicians will be cut by almost 24%. It's critical that we take meaningful action to fix the SGR before the end of the month. We all know that the SGR formula is flawed, and after 10 years of patching these cuts, after wasting $150 billion, enough is enough. It's why we began last year seriously looking at this issue, and we came up with a bipartisan, bicameral solution. In fact, it was quite the lesson in legislating. Particularly, we ended up arriving at a consensus bill on the SGR. So I asked the Republican leadership, for what reason have you poisoned this process with an unacceptable pay-for? This bill will pass today and go nowhere. It will not be taken up by the Senate. It will not be signed by the President. You have single-handedly, in my belief, stomped on months and months of hard work and effort by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and our staffs. Late night, weekends, hard compromises. We all saw the greater good in finally getting a permanent policy replacement for the SGR. But instead of working with our leadership, the Republicans have turned this into their 51st vote to repeal or undermine the ACA. And you're going to leave 13 million Americans uninsured if you were ever to succeed in repealing the ACA. This is just a poison pill. The pay-for is a poison pill for something that we agreed on in terms of the substance of fixing the SGR. So, you could have picked other ways of paying for this. I think we're close to a consensus on the pay-for, but instead you put this poison pill, you waste valuable time that you're going to basically do nothing. We only have 2 weeks left. Let's defeat this bill today, sit down over the next 2 weeks and come up with a pay-for that makes sense, not a pay-for that simply repeals the Affordable Care Act, which is working well. More and more people are signing up. I had an enrollment event this weekend in my district. People are signing up. Don't destroy the process. We have a good SGR fix.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I am very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, one of the chief architects of this bill, Mr. Upton.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I first want to commend Republicans and Democrats for getting the policy right. This is a tough nut to crack. 51-0 in our committee, led by Joe Pitts, Dr. Burgess, the Doc Caucus, Mr. Waxman, Mr. Dingell, Mr. Pallone. We worked long and hard to get the policy right, and we worked with the other committees to do it as well. The difficulty we always knew was going to be on the pay-for. And I would suggest this. We want to work with the Senate. We want to get this thing done. The pay-for is the toughest part, but let's go to conference. Let's work with the Senate to get a pay-for that can work. Now, we know that there's a deadline coming up at the end of this month. And as we look to try and find a pay-for, let me go through some of the other delays that this administration has already done. Individual mandate delay, Americans with canceled coverage due to Obamacare, delayed. Individual mandate deadline for purchasing coverage, delayed. Individual mandates for non-ACA compliant plans, delayed by the administration. Annual limit requirement, delayed. MLR requirement, delayed. MA cuts through demo bonus money, delayed. Employer reporting, delayed. Employer mandate, delayed. Subsidies only in state-run exchanges, delayed. High-risk pool closure, delayed. Out-of-pocket waiver for group health plans, delayed. Verification of eligibility for exchange subsidies, delayed. Reinsurance fee for some unions, delayed. Non-discrimination requirements for employer coverage, delayed. Subsidies only through the exchange, delayed. Shop employee choice, delayed. Shop online purchasing, delayed. Numerous healthcare.gov technical, delayed. This was never ready for prime time. We have said that from the start. If the administration has decided to delay all these things, almost 24, why not delay this too? And why not use the savings then, not only to help the physicians, we've got to think about 30 seconds more?
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
This isn't only to help our physicians, it's to help the most vulnerable, our seniors. Because if we don't reimburse our docs, the close sign is going to come up where they go for services. They're going to be denied the coverage that they have paid taxes for, that they expect to have, and yet another broken promise will be there. If the administration can delay these things, why don't we delay this? Why don't we use the savings then to pay for a program that works? And I would suggest that we vote for this, work with the Senate to get it done. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to point out that none of the delays that Mr. Upton indicated on that chart would result in 13 million people to lose insurance coverage and would raise premiums 10 to 20%. This is not a delay that we can agree to. It hurts the Affordable Care Act, and it's a betrayal of our working together on a bipartisan basis to resolve this problem. We worked together on the policy, but we were never brought in to work together on funding that policy. At this time, I want to yield to a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank our ranking member for yielding to me. I rise to express strong objection to the decision to use the Affordable Care Act's individual responsibility requirement to pay for the SGR reform. This move hijacks a thoughtful solution to a problem that's been harming Medicare beneficiaries, providers, and our budget for years, and it turns it into a political stunt. This decision is a poison pill and nothing more than more partisan politics. Congress has overridden the SGR mandated cuts to Medicare physician payments each year since 2003. Year after year, these temporary patches have been costly and disruptive. Reforming the system is long overdue. The temporary fixes to the SGR are a losing situation. The money still has to be spent, but only to just maintain the broken status quo. The bipartisan bicameral SGR bill is the closest we've come to fixing this problem once and for all, and this decision gets us further to that goal. Repealing the ACA is a game we played now 51 times. Holding SGR reform hostage to destroy the ACA and deny millions of Americans access to managed care is disgraceful. Our seniors, our doctors, including the AMA, the Texas Medical Association, the California Medical Association, and the American people deserve better. In order for our health care system to work, Americans must have insurance. Delaying or repealing the requirement that individuals obtain coverage would drive up premiums and leave millions uninsured. Again, this is purely a partisan pay-for, proves that there's not a sincere effort to finally enact SGR reform, but rather just another political game, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is
Speaker,
recognized.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a letter from the Texas Medical Association in support of this legislation.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I would like at this point to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Bouchon, another member of the Doctors Caucus.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this legislation. As a practicing physician for over 15 years, the majority of my patients were Medicare patients. I know firsthand how flawed the SGR is. By not repealing this flawed system, To remain in business, many doctors across America will be forced to limit the number of Medicare patients that they see, and many may refuse to see Medicare patients altogether. Failing to act or voting no on this legislation will limit seniors' access to their doctors. This will be especially dangerous in rural areas where there are already physician shortages. It's time that we finally solve this problem and ensure that Medicare patients have access to their chosen doctors. I urge my colleagues to stand up for all the seniors in America and support this legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield this time 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to this bill. You know, this began as a bipartisan effort, but predictably, this has devolved into nothing but another attempt by House Republicans to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. Here we go again. Over 4.2 million people have signed up for affordable insurance coverage so far, and the numbers are growing. We all support a repeal, a permanent repeal of the sustainable growth rate, because the SGR in current law is anything but sustainable. We are demanding more out of our doctors and healthcare professionals. We are asking that they operate with maximum efficiency to play their part in reining in healthcare spending, and they deserve the same from Congress. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues don't share that view. That's why they've offered a pay-for that they know will be completely unacceptable to most Democrats and certainly stands no chance of passage in the Senate. The president has even said he would veto this bill, and rightfully so. The American Medical Association, which represents most of the doctors throughout the country, and I'm disappointed that the Texas Medical Association is at variance with their national association, but the AMA and the AARP and a dozen other organizations representing healthcare providers and hospitals and seniors have decried Republicans' partisan tactics. They don't like it. We have 5 legislative days before the last SGR extension runs out on March 31st. 5 days. Should Republicans not come to their senses in time, I want doctors to know that a nearly 30% cut to their reimbursement should be laid squarely at the feet of my Republican friends here in the House. Doctors need predictability, and certainly so they can best serve their patients. If a permanent solution to the SGR is not reached soon, doctors will be forced to make tough decisions about which patients they will see and those they can no longer afford to see. Thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from
Mr.
Pennsylvania.
Speaker, may I inquire of the time left on each side?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 4 3/4 minutes, and the gentleman from California has 3 1/2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Rowe, another co-chair of the Doctors Caucus.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, this physician rises in strong support of H.R. 4015, the SGR repeal. This bipartisan compromise will both preserve seniors' access to needed medical care and give physicians certainty about how Medicare will pay them for their services. This bill also lays the groundwork for a gradual transition to a reimbursement system that rewards value instead of volume. The House, by passing H.R. 4015, will take a big step toward the permanent repeal of a flawed payment formula that has hampered physicians since 1997, but we can't allow the process to stop here. I encourage our Senate colleagues to pass a bill as quickly as possible so that we can move into conference and finally find a mechanism to repeal this bill. I would like to thank the members of the staff, the committees, for their tireless effort on this bill, particularly my friend Dr. Mike Burgess, who has long championed this reform. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 4015, and Mr. Speaker, the American Medical Association represents less than 20% of the physicians in this country. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I continue to reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers, who's another important member of the Health Subcommittee.
The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today in support of H.R. 4015, the SGR repair. This has been a long time coming, and I'm very excited to be part of it. I want to see this legislation move forward. I want to agree and disagree with my esteemed colleagues across the aisle. This does boil down to patient care. This will negatively affect our seniors if we do not solve this problem for Medicare reimbursement. It is patient access that is the core of this issue. However, when we speak about associations such as the AMA or the American Medical Association, we're talking about a group who only represent about 11% of physicians across this country, and that number decreases every year. And there's a reason for that. They're not representing doctors in this country, and their voice is not as strong as it once was and should be. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this time, and I thank my colleagues for this important message today. I hope all members support the SGR reform. Thank you.
Does the gentlelady yield?
I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 2 minutes. This should be a moment of bipartisanship where we finally fix this sustainable growth rate in Medicare physician reimbursement. None of us think it's supportable. Doctors are always facing the peril of a deep cut if we don't patch it up or fix it permanently. It's time to fix it permanently. We worked together on a bipartisan basis in our committee and came up with the policy to replace the SGR. The Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee followed us, and they did their approach, and we all worked out one uniform approach with the idea that we're finally going to end this nonsense of threatening the doctors that take care of Medicare patients. This is an issue of patient access to medical care that has been promised under Medicare. Yet, the Republicans are now insisting we pay for the permanent fix. Well, this has come up many, many times. And sometimes we paid for it, but sometimes we didn't pay for it. But we always made sure that there was a fix on a bipartisan basis. Instead, today, the Republicans, without talking to us, they wanted to talk to us about the policy, but without talking to us, are trying to pay for this by hurting the Affordable Care Act. And what they're doing is putting a partisan poison pill offset, an offset that would cause 13 million people to lose insurance coverage and would raise premiums by 10 to 20% for everybody else in the exchange. They have to know this is not acceptable. We can't support it. And they are now coming here to the floor saying that there's some attempt by the Democrats to undermine our policy agreement. Well, let's stop blaming each other. Let's get to work and resolve this problem and vote down this bill. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Speaker, may I inquire of the minority how many speakers they have left?
How many speakers does the minority have?
Do you have any more speakers?
Just one more person.
I'll reserve.
Well, no,
We have one speaker.
Oh, you have one speaker. Well, we'll yield back the balance of our time.
All right, at this time then, Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time to Dr. Burgess, the prime sponsor of this legislation, who's worked tirelessly to achieve this day.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Remainder of my time.
And I want to thank my friend from Pennsylvania for yielding the time, the chairman of the subcommittee, for making this possible to bring this bill to the floor today. I want to thank Chairman Upton for the full committee and Ranking Member Waxman of the full committee for also making this possible. It has been a lot of hard work getting us to this point. Chairman Upton talked about delays. I would just point out that there has been yet another delay, the delay of the closure of the risk pools, because, let's be honest, the Affordable Care Act is not ready to take on those people who have pre-existing conditions, so they felt it necessary to keep the risk pools open for an additional length of time. But I want to talk to my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle. I particularly want to talk to those who've only been here 1 or 2 terms. The last time we had a bill like this on the floor of the House, Democrats were in charge. Mr. Waxman, or I think Mr. Dingell, was chairman of our Energy and Commerce Committee, and he brought a bill to the floor, H.R. 3961, which was an SGR repeal bill. This bill had already been rejected by the Senate, so it really had no chance of going anywhere. This bill was not paid for. The policy was awful and would have given us 2 SGRs instead of 1, but nevertheless, that bill came to the floor. It only garnered 1 Republican vote. I was that vote. I was that vote because I thought it was important that the nation's doctors heard that we were willing to work together across party lines if need be to solve this problem for them. I wanted to preserve the process going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the bill you have on the floor today, H.R. 4015, is not the destination. It is the key that gets you through the door to get to that destination. For 4.5 weeks, since February 6th, the policy has been out there for all to see. We have awaited anyone from the Senate side who wanted to talk to us about negotiating bipartisan pay-fors. Radio silence. Now look, I don't know what Rule 14 is over the Senate, but it's apparently pretty important. The majority leader in the other body has brought this bill up under Rule 14, but they were doing nothing before. For 4 weeks, this policy languished without them picking it up. Now that the House is moving a bill and will likely pass the bill today with a decent pay-for that is in fact bipartisan, because 27 Democrats voted for this very pay-for last week on the floor of this House. In fact, it was unanimous if we were exempting firefighters or veterans from the individual mandate in the Affordable Care Act. This is a bipartisan pay-for. It has passed the floor of this House in a bipartisan fashion. It is ready to go. We call upon our colleagues in the other body, use whatever Senate procedures you need to, but get this done because the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking towards March 31st. We all know what happens to the nation's seniors on that date. We all know what happens to their doctors. Let us get this done. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to strongly support H.R. 4015, the SGR Repeal and Provider Payment Modernization Act as amended. The Ways and Means Committee and Energy and Commerce Committee and Senate Finance Committee have worked in a bipartisan manner to develop a permanent physician payment fix repeal. Years of hearings, discussion drafts, and ongoing dialogues with stakeholders have resulted in H.R. 4015, a bipartisan, bicameral agreement on SGR replacement policy. This bill has over 100 co-sponsors, has the support of 18 members of the House Doctors Caucus, and 600 national and state organizations representing physicians and other professionals. And there's a reason for all of this support. H.R. 4015 has a lot to like. It repeals the outdated SGR formula and gives seniors the certainty that they'll have access to their doctors. It incentivizes better care and better results for seniors that rely on the Medicare program. And it breaks the cycle of uncertainty for doctors and their patients, providing permanent relief and improving how Medicare pays doctors. We must not let this opportunity pass by. Time is short. If we do not act in just 2 weeks, doctors will see a 24% cut in their Medicare reimbursement, jeopardizing seniors' access to care. But we must safeguard taxpayer dollars, and that's why we pay for permanent repeal by delaying the health care law's individual mandate for 5 years. Americans across the country are facing higher costs, losing the coverage they have and like, and are seeing smaller paychecks as a result of Obamacare. Last week, the administration announced that it would continue to expand certain exemptions from the individual mandate for 2 years. This proposal would extend that further, what the administration is already doing, and give all Americans relief from the mandates and penalties of Obamacare. It's only fair. I urge all members to support H.R. 4105. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, control the remainder of the time.
Without objection. Do I recognize him? The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I shall consume.
Without objection.
What's going on here? The Republicans are bringing up a totally partisan bill to thwart a bipartisan bill. They are tossing aside common ground for barren ground, another Affordable Care repeal vote. They are throwing out a historic bipartisan breakthrough to permanently end and replace the broken Medicare physician payment formula, once again turning to totally partisan politics. The breakthrough achieved by our committees would permanently replace the deeply flawed SGR formula with a system designed to build on delivery system reforms that move Medicare physician payments toward a more accountable, value-driven system. The underlying policy agreement is broadly supported by both provider communities and beneficiaries, but today's exercise is opposed by groups representing seniors, doctors, health plans, and others because it guts the Affordable Care Act through a 5-year delay to the individual mandate. What would the result be? According to CBO and the Joint Tax Committee, the Republican bill would increase the number of uninsured Americans by 13 million. What's more, the bill would raise individual market health insurance premiums by 10 to 20% for those who remain insured. Last week, we saw the 50th vote. This is now the 51st vote to undermine the Affordable Care Act. So much for good faith and so much for goodwill. Instead of working to find common ground to finish the job on a bipartisan solution vital to fixing a problem in our healthcare system, House Republicans are taking, once again, a cynical step in a very familiar direction, concerned only about the November election. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, enough really is enough. The unfair way Medicare pays our local doctors to treat our seniors has gone on for far too long. It's making it harder for seniors to see a doctor they know and who know them. It's chasing local doctors out of Medicare and out of private practice. And it's encouraging too much waste and too many unnecessary procedures within Medicare. As chairman of the Health Subcommittee of Ways and Means, my top priority has been to find a permanent, reliable, 21st century solution that both political parties and physicians can embrace. H.R. 4015 repeals the current flawed formula for reimbursing our doctors and ends the yearly threat of massive cuts. Working with America's physicians, it establishes a more patient-centered approach that provides stability to our doctors, rewards them for high-quality care, begins to streamline the red tape our physicians face, and encourages better coordination and prevention. Over time, it transitions to a model that rewards value over volume, using the real-life approaches that doctors use, not what Washington wants. H.R. 4015 is a solid foundation from which to build an even better Medicare system, and it has overwhelming support from physicians. This is a major step forward, but we need to finish the job. We need to work together, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, to figure out how to make this policy a reality in a way that doesn't increase the deficit. There may be disagreements over how to pay for this reform. That's understandable. It's difficult, and today's bill is not the last word. Let's continue to advance this long overdue solution and commit to finding a bipartisan solution between the House and the Senate. The clock is ticking, so let's act together today. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Now my pleasure to you. 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Could I revise and extend my remarks?
Without objection.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. This bill has nothing to do with paying the doctors that work every day giving medical care to medical care patients. What it has to do with destroying the Affordable Care Act for the 51st time. I'm certain that those that are listening to the debate and know what's going on believe it's ridiculous to try to defeat a bill that's been signed into law, because they know that the Senate's not going to pass it, and they know, the Republicans that is, know that the president would veto it. So why do they do it? Well, they do it because there's a small group of people in the Republican Party that don't mind politically dying. I don't mind them taking down the party if that's their intent, but they've taken down the Democrats and the reputations of the House of Representatives as well. Somewhere along the line, the Speaker has to do again what he has done before, and that is saying, enough of this. We're not going to allow the wings of the Congress to be broken on one side just because some people just want their way. And so I assume that nobody in these districts have insurance problems. I assume that everyone is insured and working in these districts that try to destroy the Affordable Care Act. They don't have any conditions, preconditions that restrict them from getting health care. They all are working, they all are happy, and I just hope that one day before this year ends that the Republicans will come to their senses and try to gain the respectability, the credibility that they once enjoyed. I'm a diehard Democrat, but I don't want this country just to have one party. We do need two responsible parties in order to guide this nation through its democratic process.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to a gentleman from Louisiana, a physician, a key member of the Ways and Means Committee. I cannot describe how important a role he has played in finding this new solution to how we reimburse doctors under Medicare. The gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Bustani.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I applaud Chairman Brady's leadership on this issue. He has been instrumental in getting us to this point. I rise in support of this bill after 3 long years of working on the policy to actually get to a bipartisan, bicameral agreement on policy and divided government. It's not been easy, but we've managed to get an agreement on the policy to repeal automatic annual cuts to physicians, 24% cut in just a matter of weeks facing doctors under this flawed formula. Now, Congress first promised to repeal this formula more than a decade ago. Democrats repeated the promise when we were debating Obamacare, and they failed to put it in there. They failed to address it in Obamacare. Passage of this important bipartisan legislation would finally honor that promise, protecting seniors' access to doctors, a doctor-patient relationship built on trust and high quality, and it ensures quality measures going forward, and it creates certainty for physicians and seniors. Now, I want to point out something because our friends have not given the full story here. We've agreed on the policy, but we have a problem in coming up with a pay-for-us. It's a tough conversation, but the talks broke down in a divided government. Senate leadership has refused to negotiate in good faith and discuss responsible ways to pay for the bill's $138 billion price tag. We're going to pass this bill to get those discussions started. Republicans proposed savings from the delay of Obamacare's very unpopular individual mandate. Now, I don't think it's acceptable to do nothing. And I don't think it's acceptable for the Senate Majority Leader and others in the Senate to just put their heads in the sand on this. And I hope that the Senate will pass a version of H.R. 4015, giving us time to get together to hash out the differences. We're so close. We're on the goal line to finish this work that's been undone for years. It's time to get it done. The President's own budget lists bipartisan Medicare reforms that the President put on the table that could easily raise the bulk needed of savings to repeal SGR. And we can do this without shifting more cost to our nation's credit card, without resorting to budget gimmicks or imposing massive new cuts on hospitals and other providers. We have a clear path. We can get this done in a bipartisan way. Mr. Speaker, as a heart surgeon who has cared for thousands of seniors under the Medicare program, I urge House and Senate colleagues to pass this bill, and let's get down to the negotiations on how we're going to pay for it in good faith, and let's finalize an agreement on how to fix this long-standing problem, which has been a thorn not only in the side of doctors, but it's been a real problem for Medicare access, real problem for seniors seeking access to a high-quality doctor-patient relationship. Mr. Speaker, I've had enough. It's time to get this done. Pass this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I yield myself 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized.
I say to my colleague, what you're doing essentially is undercutting bipartisanship with pure partisan politics. Pointing to the Senate is pure mythology. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Washington, the ranking member on the Health Subcommittee.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this 51st attempt to repeal the ACA by stopping the individual mandate is part of the long-term propaganda campaign done by the Republicans to destroy the health care plan that the president put together. Now, they know that we agree on the policy. Everybody here agrees on the policy. But they put a poison pill in it. They knew that this amendment of how to pay for it, that is by delaying the mandate, would kill any Democratic support in the House. So they have no intention of passing this bill. This bill is directed at the propaganda campaign to the people at Koch brothers and at Fox News, and anybody who's watching this will get the idea that somehow it's a bad bill. Now, the fact is that people are benefiting every single day. The AARP, the American Medical Association, have denounced this bill because they want the SGR, the doctor's payment reform, to go through. And they know that the Republicans have designed this to fail. Now, a mandate that has been supported even by the Tea Party before the Tea Party said we got to be against it is what is at issue here. Doctors and health insurance companies will not be able to operate if you don't have an individual mandate. The Republicans said this. The Heritage Institute said it. Everybody said it, but they want to kill it. Now, this alternative universe that we're creating with this propaganda campaign, we see wild claims about people who live in inner cities are somehow worthless and they don't want to take care of their families and feed them. And we hear things coming out of the Speaker's office that clearly aren't true about the ACA. Let's suppose that actually happened. What would happen if we repealed and destroyed the ACA today? We would get rid of 13 million people on the rolls by 2018. We would take away health insurance. Health insurance premiums would rise 10 to 20% by 2018. Millions of Americans would not be able to afford the health care they need. Now, this is a failure of leadership. They would rather run a propaganda campaign to hold on to the House. We watched in Florida just the last week how much money, $13 million, I guess, was spent in that campaign to tar
the Affordable Care Act. That's what this is all about. No one should be the least bit confused. That's not what America wants. America wants health security.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Vote no on this bill.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to yield 3 minutes to the next gentleman. He's one of the newest members of the Ways and Means Committee. He's a businessman, but he's a real fighter for Pennsylvania seniors and doctors. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker. There's very few times in my life that I've really had the privilege of representing people who are so dear to me. And I just think if you were to look at our generation, we would all have to agree that we grew up in the greatest towns at the greatest times with the greatest parents, preachers, teachers, and coaches, grandmas and grandpas, and aunts and uncles. This is the people's house. The people's house. This is not a Republican house or a Democrat house. This is the people's house. What are we talking about today? My goodness, this is so disappointing that we're so worried about the next election that we can't see the direction that we're going in. To be able to offer peace of mind to those folks who have made the greatest sacrifices, made the greatest contributions, and have done the best that they could to make sure that the next generation had the same opportunities they had. This is not a doc fix. This is a senior fix. As my mother lay dying, and my sister and my father, they were surrounded by a loving family. And they were also surrounded by caring doctors. Why? Why would we make this about an election? Why would we not look inward to who it is that we are trying to protect? If we cannot protect the most vulnerable in our society right now, especially in their end days and their end times, and say you can lay your head on a pillow tonight knowing that your doctor's going to be there for you, that I'll be beside you, I'll be by your bed saying the rosary. And when you're finally gone, I can't wait till the next time we're able to meet each other again in heaven. But why would we make their last days so difficult? Why would we make it so uncertain? So we talk about an SGR, but where I come from, it's not that. And it's not a doc fix. It's a senior fix. When can we possibly put politics behind us and start to look at what's best for the people that we represent? I am a representative of Pennsylvania's 3rd District. So privileged and so proud to be able to do it. Not boastful proud, but thankful proud that I can actually go and do something for the people who raised me, who taught me, who coached me, and who have walked me through the most difficult parts of my life, and looking back at their life and saying, but you sacrificed so much that I could be here. Can we not just come together and do something? But really is a big thank you and a kiss on the forehead as they lay there wondering, where are those folks that we did so much for? My goodness, my friends from the other side, this is not about politics. This is about people. We are in the people's house. And these are things that we must do. Mr. Chairman, I thank you so much for doing this and bringing peace of mind to the people that we represent. And I can't tell you how disappointing it is today to hear this turned into some kind of a political debate that has nothing to do with the fate of those seniors and those people who we love so much and who have done so much for us. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan is
I yield
recognized.
myself 15 seconds.
The gentleman's recognized for 15 seconds.
I say to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the problem is your bill is nothing but a political bill. It's nothing except about the November election. Nothing but. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, an active, distinguished member of our committee, Mr. Blumenauer.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. I was somewhat embarrassed by the remarks from my friend who's from the hometown of my wife, Butler, Pennsylvania, because the Republicans have decided to make this bill about the next election. There is no reason the House Republicans put the medical community through this charade again and again, year after year, except to use the SGR as a tool for power, partisan advantage, and fundraising. This political tool disrupts the lives of millions of medical providers and tens of millions of their patients who rely upon them. We had, in fact, been making remarkable progress in both the Commerce Committee and the Ways and Means Committee on a bipartisan solution. Instead, the Republicans have hijacked this bipartisan solution and made it so bad that the American Medical Association rejects it. What then should we do? Well, we should reject this bill overwhelmingly. It certainly will never be enacted into law. What then should we do? Well, I would argue that we ought to just reset the baseline. Remember the alternative minimum tax? We finally decided it would never be imposed. Adjust the budget to reflect the fact that it will never happen. And if you won't do that, at least give the medical community procedural fairness. Kevin Brady said, let's work in a bipartisan approach. And admits that this isn't going to be the last word. Well, let's try procedural fairness. Allow the bipartisan proposal on the floor for a full debate and amendment. Now, there's a novel thought. Let the legislative process work and let the House work its will. This shameful charade will then end.
Speaker.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'd like to yield 3 minutes to, again, one of our key members of the Ways and Means Committee, who's brought the concerns of New York doctors and seniors to our attention. Gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed.
How much time is the gentleman yielding?
3 minutes, sir.
And may the gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, may I first inquire how much time we have?
Each side has 5 minutes remaining.
3.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to Chairman Brady for yielding the time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about this very important issue that this bill is here to address. We have, at the end of the month, a cliff where our providers under Medicare are going to be looking at a 25 or 24% cut in their reimbursements for caring for our seniors. And what are we doing today? The other side is engaging in political theater rather than deal with the issue at hand. We have an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, an opportunity to fix a problem out of Washington, D.C. that has repeatedly been coming up since 2003 and do it on a long-term, permanent basis. We have spent in minor patches to the doc fix over that period of time $150 billion. Today we have an opportunity through the bipartisan work on the policy that will resolve this issue once and for all to do it at a cost of $138 billion. That would take care of this threat to our seniors and to the doctors that are providing for them on a permanent basis. That's the right thing to do. So what is the argument over? Well, how are we going to pay for it? Now, my friends in the other chamber, on the other side of this esteemed building here, feel we should continue the status quo of Washington, D.C., and not pay for our policy decisions that we decide here in Washington. We have put forth a proposed solution on this side of the aisle to say, look it, let's take what you're doing to the employer mandate under the Affordable Care Act by extending a delay for the employer mandate that they've already done for the White House to the individuals who are subject to the Affordable Care Act. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that the fair thing to do? Isn't that the right thing to do? If you're going to delay it for big business, why don't you delay it for moms and pops and sons and daughters across America and use that money in savings to pay for a permanent solution here in Washington, D.C. when it comes to paying for our doctors as they care for our elderly and our seniors? That's a common sense proposal. And yet we play political theater on this important issue. We can't do that. Our hardworking taxpayers back home, Mr. Speaker, deserve better. I came here to Washington, D.C. to do something, to change the status quo. And we have an opportunity to take an issue that has been pending ad nausea since 2003 and get it taken care of permanently and give that certainty, that ability for our providers to our seniors to know what they're going to get paid, to make sure that our seniors have the comfort of knowing that their doctors are going to have their doors open to take care of them when they need them the most. That's what we should be focusing on, Mr. Speaker. And I encourage my colleagues to support this legislation and get this permanent solution in place.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
I now yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from New Jersey, a member of our committee, Mr. Pasquale.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, to quote a very famous president, there they go again. This is an alternative universe, through the chair, that you're trying to create. For years, we've been talking about how to reform SGR, how to pay for it, our Medicare providers. And I, along with my Democratic colleagues and some Republicans, supported past efforts to repeal and replace SGR once and for all. But we've never been able to get it done. That changed late last year. The Energy and Commerce Committee passed unanimously a bill to repeal and replace SGR. Building on that proposal, Republicans and Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee and in the Ways and Means Committee here, which I sit on, came together and passed the bill that repeals SGR and replaces it with a payment system that rewards providers for delivering quality care to our seniors. What you have done, through the Speaker, is taken months of thoughtful bipartisan policymaking and thrown it away in order to score some really poor and cheap political points. And all you're trying to do is undermine affordable care. What are you going to do with the 13 million people who can't get affordable care if we delay the personal mandate? You have never come up with an answer. You've never had an answer to what are you going to do about health care. All you could do is criticize
time has expired.
and
Yield an
criticize.
additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman yields.
Delaying the individual mandate will result in 13 million fewer Americans getting health insurance through the ACA and higher premiums for those with health. You want it to fail. You don't want it to succeed. You forgot what you did back 9 years ago when we passed the Premium D. We went back to our districts and made it work, even though we voted against it. That's the American way. Learn the American way. It works. Don't go on recess.
Expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Speaker, I'll reserve my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair would ask members to address your remarks to the chair and not to other members. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Oh, okay. I now yield a minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Nolan.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, gentlemen, I rise in support of my colleague Dan Kilde's efforts to reinstate the health care tax credit, unfortunately rejected by the House Republicans under yet another closed rule. Having served in this Congress at an earlier time in my life, I am astonished how undemocratic this institution has become. Back in the day, if you had an amendment, you got an opportunity to offer it. And you had an opportunity to debate it till all the debate was exhausted and you had an opportunity to vote on it. What a tragedy that the People's House seems to hardly be a democratic institution any longer. When this program that I'm talking about here, the health care tax credit, expired in January, thousands of retired workers on the Iron Range in my district of Minnesota saw their pensions cut in half. These are former employees of companies like LTV, National Steel, giants in American manufacturing. Some of these hardworking men and women are responsible for pulling America out of the Great Depression, helping us win World War II, supplying the world with superior product made in America. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, let us have a vote.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll reserve at this time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
It's now my pleasure to yield 1 minute to our very distinguished leader, the gentlelady from California, Nancy Pelosi.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for his relentless and persistent leadership in helping America's seniors, today manifested in his support for SGR and his opposition to this ill-designed approach by the Republicans. Mr. Speaker, today House Republicans are proving that their obsession with tearing down the Affordable Care Act is blurring their vision, that it has no boundaries. For the 51st vote to repeal or undermine the Affordable Care Act, Republicans are turning their partisanship against the health and security of our nation's seniors. The House Republican leadership's political games are threatening to derail months of bipartisan, bicameral House and Senate progress on a permanent Medicare doc fix, threatening our seniors' ability to see their doctors and get the health care they need. Earlier this week, the AARP, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, the National Council on Aging, and other key senior advocacy groups wrote to congressional leadership to make it clear that the Republicans' actions would, quote, inject partisan politics into bipartisan legislation and, they wrote, undermines the months of hard work done by committees, their staffs, and concerned stakeholders. The Republicans' approach has been rejected not only by the senior advocacy groups, but by providers, the doctors, insurers, and seniors. Yet they persist with their reckless partisan antics, even as time quickly runs down to address the sustainable growth rate, the SGR formula, before the end of the month. Twice this week, Republicans blocked the House from considering a fully paid-for measure that includes the reforms of SGR supported by both Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate and on the committees. Why have Republicans chosen to proceed in this manner after months of bipartisan progress? Why didn't Republican leadership work with Democrats to find acceptable offsets? We need to get this done, and Republicans know that their baldly partisan effort is a non-starter. If it passed, it would spike health insurance premiums by 10 to 20%, according to the Congressional Budget Office. It would cause 13 fewer Americans to be insured, says the Congressional Budget Office. What does this mean to families? If you have a child in your family between the ages of 18 and 26, they would no longer be able to be on their parents' policy. It would, being a woman, under the Affordable Care Act, being a woman is no longer a pre-existing medical condition. But the Republican actions here today would reverse that, would take us back to a time where women paid more for policies simply because they were women. It would, again, reject, eliminate the very important provision of the Affordable Care Act about saying you cannot be denied coverage because you have a pre-existing medical condition. Tens of millions of families, probably 100 million people, are affected by not being denied coverage because of a pre-existing medical condition. That's how many people it would affect. And it would eliminate the requirement of the Affordable Care Act that there be no cap, either annual or lifetime limit, on the health insurance that you would receive. For these and other reasons, this is a really bad idea. We may only hope that after this 51st vote, Republicans' fever will break and they will return to work with Democrats to pass bipartisan, bicameral legislation as a permanent doc fix that seniors need before the end of the month. We're going out today again with work undone. 10 days before we come back, 24th of March, the SGR expires at the end of March. We shouldn't be wasting time on this foolishness and recklessness. We should be finding a solution. That's what the American people send us here to do. The Republicans' fixation with destroying the health security of millions of Americans through their efforts to destroy the Affordable Care Act, imperil the permanent doc fix. And that must stop. Congress is wasting time again, as I said, on these endless, wasteful votes. Time should be spent renewing emergency unemployment insurance, raising the minimum wage, rebuilding America by investing in education and building our infrastructure, creating jobs. The American people deserve better than this. They deserve a Congress that works to strengthen the middle class, tackle the opportunity gap, create jobs, and build an economy that works for everyone. I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill, and I hope that when we return after the recess week, yet again another recess week, Republicans will be ready to get serious and be ready to get back to work for a permanent doc fix so that our seniors will be served. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed S. 1456 to award the Congressional Gold Medal to Shimon Peres, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, has 2 minutes, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, has 1 minute remaining. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Levin, I'm prepared to close if you are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that be placed in the record the following letters from American Health Insurance Plans, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the California Medical Association, from AFSCME, and also from the Alliance for Retired Americans.
Without objection.
These are just a few of the examples of letters and communications from opponents. You know, you can just boil this down to a few words. The Republicans are so intent on manipulating everything so that they think they can strengthen themselves for November that they put a poison pill into a bipartisan product. A product that we worked months to perfect. So there's no shame. So March is irrelevant. November seems to be everything. This bill cannot become law. This is an effort simply of a political nature. I very much urge you at this last minute, rethink what you're doing. It is so transparent. It is so transparent.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman is recognized.
First, I want to commend and thank our Democrat colleagues on Ways and Means Committee and staff for working so hard, along with Energy and Commerce and Finance Committee and the Senate, to find a good, solid solution. I think we've made a big step forward. We've got some work to do. I know we can do it. I went to see my doctor the other week. He's 66 years old. Looks like he's 46. Kind of makes me mad. But he's got a successful practice, a very good doctor. He told me he would like to keep practicing for another 5 or 6 years. He said, but Kevin, I'm not going to. This will probably be my last year. Medicare has just made it too hard for him to stay in practice. And as I left the examining room, I looked at his assistants, who's been with him 30-some years, all this professional staff, a full waiting room. And I thought, what are we doing chasing a doctor like this out of practice early? And who's going to replace him? Who's going to take care of these people? But he's not alone. In Texas, less than half of Texas family physicians take new Medicare patients. Many of them are rethinking their relationship with Medicare. Others are closing their private practice. So more and more seniors are chasing fewer and fewer doctors, and that's the dilemma we face today. Maybe I'm an optimist, but I think we're 90% of the way towards solving this solution. We have broad support for this policy and this bill. We have a duty to make sure our seniors have access to their doctors, and Democrats and Republicans have been putting a lot of work to solve this problem. Yeah, we have some work to do. Now's the time to permanently fix the way we reimburse our doctors as we move forward. Let's work in a bipartisan way across the chambers, across the party to get it done. I'm absolutely confident we can do that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 515, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment in third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 18 of the Social Security Act to repeal the Medicare Sustainable Growth Rate and improve Medicare payments for physicians and other professionals and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve a point of order against the motion to recommit.
Point of order secured. The clerk will report.
Mr. Loebsack of Iowa moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 4015, to the Committee on Ways and Means with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add, at the end of the bill, add the following section: prohibition on Medicare cuts or vouchers. Nothing in this act shall reduce benefits under the Medicare program under Title 18 of the Social Security Act. Eliminate guaranteed health insurance benefits available to seniors or individuals with disabilities under such program, or establish a Medicare voucher plan that provides limited payments to Medicare beneficiaries in order to purchase health care in private sector.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Mr. Speaker, this is the final amendment to the bill, which will not kill the bill or send it back to the committee. And if adopted, the bill will immediately proceed to final passage as amended. I regularly meet with seniors across Iowa, and far too often I hear that many of them are struggling to make ends meet, just as I'm sure that many of my colleagues hear from their seniors as well. They tell me how much they rely on Medicare in order to stay healthy and just to afford their daily necessities. Mr. Speaker, our seniors did not get us into this fiscal mess that we are in today, and I think we have to keep that in mind. And it is unfair to punish them for Washington's irresponsible behavior. That is why we've got to protect Medicare for seniors who've worked a lifetime to pay into it. This also is an issue, I will say, that's personal to me. I grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet. I often talk about how I grew up in poverty. My mom was a single parent who struggled with mental illness. And literally in the 4th grade, we landed at the doorstep of my maternal grandmother. My grandmother often relied on Social Security survivor benefits to care for me and my siblings. And without the promise of health care through Medicare, she would not have been able to afford to put food on the table. No senior, and I think all of us in this body can agree, no senior should have to choose between paying their bills or paying for their medication. Mr. Speaker, replacing Medicare with a voucher system would end the guarantee of health care and financial security for our seniors as well. Vouchers would force seniors to pay more and more of their health care costs out of pocket. In these tough economic times, we need to find ways to be more efficient while maintaining quality care. I know that seniors don't want a voucher that forces them to buy insurance that may not meet their needs, because they tell me that every single time I meet with them. They do not want their health care to be subject to the whims of insurance companies looking to make a profit when those seniors get sick. They don't want higher costs, and they certainly don't want reduced benefits. They want to keep Medicare the way it is, a guaranteed benefit they can count on when they need it, and they paid into it, and they deserve it. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this final amendment to the bill, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my point of order and claim the time in opposition to the motion.
Reservation is withdrawn. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To begin with, I'd just like to acknowledge all the good work on both sides of the aisle in reaching the bipartisan policy agreement in the SGR, and especially want to thank our staff, Clay Alspach and Robert Horn and Chris Pope, and everyone on both sides of the aisle and the staff for all the good work. Mr. Speaker, this bill before us presents each and every member of this body a simple choice. Do we patch Medicare or do we fix it? Do we choose to fight for the Medicare promise that this country has made to every American, or do we vote against it? My friends, I'm voting today to keep the Medicare promise to Americans. We must not let another opportunity to save Medicare for our seniors fall by the wayside. If Washington is broken, today is an opportunity to fix it. The bill before us is bipartisan, and the pay-for is one President Obama has used himself many times in the past. My colleagues, did you scream hypocrisy when President Obama delayed the mandate for special interests here in D.C.? Then why would you scream hypocrisy now? The time for political games is over. It's time for members of this body to choose. Are you on the side of seniors in your district that depend on Medicare, or are you against them? Are you on the side of younger Americans who keep telling us they are struggling under an Obamacare plan that forces them to choose between groceries and health care? Are you for saving Medicare, or will you vote to let it go bankrupt? What kind of country are we living in when our own government has reduced the American dream to a choice between health care and groceries? This motion to recommit embraces the tired gimmicks of yesterday that the public has grown to disgust. You have a clear choice. You either vote no and stand up for what's right to give our seniors the peace of mind they deserve, or you can vote yes on this motion to recommit and demonstrate to the American public that political games are more important to you than their health and welfare. I, for one, will be voting with seniors this morning, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. Vote no on the motion to recommit. I yield back.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The motion is...
On that, I request recorded vote.
The recorded vote is requested. Yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record the votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage of the bill. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 191, the nays are 226. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. And the ayes have
Today.
Ayes have been requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.